Hello and welcome to Waterford Libraries for a very special story time. Today I have a few different people joining me. I have a giant. I have Jack. So you might have guessed what story I will be telling you today. But I have a little surprise for you. It's not Jack and the Beanstalk. It's actually George and the Beanstalk, because George is a giant. Hello. And George, like all the giants that he knows, is a gardener. And George and his friends use magic beans to grow their vegetables, because they grow their vegetables up in the clouds. So they need magic beans to grow their vegetables and their fruit, don't you, George? So one day, George was out in his garden and he was planning to plant some beans, wasn't it, George? Yeah. And he felt in his pocket and he thought, there's a hole in my pocket. Oh dear. That means the magic beans that he had put in his pocket had fallen out. Well, George searched everywhere, didn't you, George? He went, he looked down into his cloud garden and he couldn't see anything. So what did you do then, George? Well, George went back into his house and he checked his bedroom, his kitchen and his sitting room, but no beans. No beans anywhere. So then he looked out in his garden again to check was there any holes in the clouds. And there was a hole in the clouds. But what could George do? He figured these beans would only grow in the cloud gardens that the giants had. He didn't think they'd grow down on earth in the grass. Oh, George, you're about to get a big surprise. When George woke up the next day, imagine his surprise. He saw a giant beanstalk reaching from the grass down on earth up into the clouds just outside his cloud garden. My goodness, George, you must have gotten some big fright. He did. And George is actually a very nice, friendly giant. So he was thinking, I hope nobody comes up to visit me from down there on earth. But later that day, George heard some tiny little footsteps running around his kitchen. And the reason George could hear them was because George and all giants have very big ears, so they can hear really tiny anything. They can hear a little pin dropping, or they can hear a little mouse scurrying along the floor. So he could hear Jack. And Jack was very scared, so Jack hid in a, what was it again? He hid inside a teapot, and he got very, very wet. Now luckily it wasn't hot tea. George let his tea go cold. So Jack wasn't very hot, but he was very, very wet. And when George fetched him out, he went, please don't eat me. George said, eat you? I don't eat people. I eat vegetables and fruit. I'm a very healthy giant. Oh, okay, said Jack. But he was still shaking. He said, I'm very, very sorry. But my mom and I, we don't have a lot of food. So when I saw this big beanstalk, I climbed up and up and up and up and up. And then I saw all your lovely food and your fruit and your vegetables. And I thought, would it be okay if maybe I took some? Well, actually, I was going to steal it. Steal it? But then George stopped and he thought, look at poor Jack. He looks very hungry and very tired. And then he looked out at his cloud garden and he thought, well, I have lots and lots of vegetables and lots of fruit. Probably more than I need. And he decided to do something very kind, and he decided to share his fruit and vegetables with Jack. So Jack was so happy. Oh, thank you, George. And he gave him a big hug. And then Jack took some fruit and vegetables and he went back down to his mommy, who was very happy to see him. And this continued for the next few days, didn't it, George? Yeah. George shared his food with Jack and his mommy. But what they didn't realize was that Sneaky Sid, Jack's neighbor, was watching everything. And one day he saw Jack coming back down the beanstalk with lots of juicy fruit, lots of yummy vegetables, and he thought, I'd like some of that. So he decided to climb up the beanstalk. And George was out in his garden doing some gardening, and Sid snuck into his kitchen. And there he saw George's absolute favourite golden harp. And George had this harp a very long time, didn't you, George? And George absolutely loves playing this harp. So I don't think he'd be very happy if it went missing. But Sneaky Sid thought, haha, gold. I'd like some of that. But it was so heavy. He tried pulling it and pulling it, but he couldn't. And then a little voice spoke up. Don't take me, I belong to George. George, 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 come quick. Well, George heard the voice, and it was the voice of the harp. And he came running in from the garden. He said, thief, stop. And he shot out a hand. Sid said, ha, 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 I may not have your harp, but I found all these nice gold coins in your purse, and I'm getting out of here. And he ran back to the beanstalk and tried to run down the beanstalk. George wasn't the most fit giant. He was stomping after him. He said, fee, fi, fo, foo, I'm coming to get you. But Sid was much too quick, and he slid down the beanstalk. He ran into the village, and he told everyone there that there was a big scary giant coming to get him. And all they could hear was, fee, fi, fo, foo, I'm coming to get you. So they thought that Sid was right, that George was actually an angry, scary giant. So they came out and they were getting ready to chop down the beanstalk when Jack appeared, and he said, stop, stop. That's my friend George the Giant. He's really nice. And he told everybody how George had kindly shared all his fruit and vegetables with him. Now at this stage, George was just coming down. He was halfway down the beanstalk. And the villagers were there with their big axes, and they were just trying to chop through the beanstalk. And poor George was very scared. He was trembling. He said, please don't chop down the beanstalk. And Jack said, please don't chop down the beanstalk. My mommy and I have had so many delicious dinners thanks to George, and we're feeling so much better. We're going to bed with our tummies full, and it's all thanks to George. Now, the villagers knew that Sid could be a bit of a meanie. So they decided, well, Jack always tells us the truth. And they stopped what they were doing. They stopped with their axes. They stood back and they let George come all the way down the beanstalk. And he said, hello everyone. He was feeling a bit shy with everybody watching him. He said, I am actually really a nice giant. If you like, I can bring down lots of fruit and vegetables and we can have a big feast. And the villagers thought, yum, I could do with some fresh fruit and vegetables. So they took out a great big table and they set up all the food that they had in their houses too. So some people brought bread, some people brought some delicious raspberry juice, some people brought strawberry juice, some people brought chairs and napkins and plates. Everybody got together and George brought down some delicious fruit and vegetables, and they had a really nice big party with Jack and his mommy and all the villagers. And do you think that Sid was invited? Not a chance. And the villagers made him give back the gold coins as well. So that is the real story of Jack, George, and the Beanstalk. And we hope you've enjoyed listening to it today. So I've enjoyed hanging out with George and Jack, not so much Sid and Jack's mum. So we're going to say goodbye. Bye from George. Bye from Jack. And bye from Jack's mummy. I hope you'll join me for another story time again soon. Take care.